What would you do? If you saw a man dying in the snow but saving him meant risking your own life, would you stop? Or would you keep climbing, chasing a dream that might never forgive you? This is not just a hypothetical question. In 2006, on the deadliest slopes of Mount Everest, one man's lonely death shook the entire world and forced climbers, adventurers, and ordinary people alike to confront the harshest question of all. How much is a human life worth? When you are standing in the death zone, welcome to Ben's Stories, where we uncover the darkest, most haunting tales behind true events. Stay until the end, because this story is not what you think it is. The Dreamer. David Sharp was not a celebrity, not a record-breaking mountaineer, and not a millionaire adventurer with sponsors paying his way up the world's highest mountain. He was, in many ways, just an ordinary man with an extraordinary dream. Born in 1972 in Harpenden, England, David was described by friends as quiet, thoughtful, and intelligent. He had a deep love for challenges, for mathematics, and for the mountains. After finishing his studies in engineering, he built a stable career, but his mind often drifted beyond the office walls, to snow, to ice, to those majestic peaks where oxygen is scarce, and human endurance is tested to its absolute limit. For years, David trained and climbed smaller mountains, honing his skills, pushing his body. He wasn't reckless, he was methodical. But Everest was different. It was the ultimate frontier, the ultimate challenge. And in 2006, David decided it was finally his time. Unlike many climbers who joined guided expeditions, David chose a low-cost, independent approach. He joined a group called Asian Trekking, which provided base camp services but minimal support on the mountain. It was cheaper, but it also meant fewer safety nets. No personal Sherpas, no guarantees. On Everest, this decision could be the difference between life and death. Still, David believed in himself. He had climbed Cho Oyu, the sixth highest mountain in the world. He had already proven he could push beyond the clouds. Now Everest awaited, the mountain that devours dreams. To understand David's story, we need to understand the monster he faced. Mount Everest is not just a mountain, it's a graveyard. At 8,148 meters above sea level, the air is so thin that every step feels like walking with lungs half empty. Above 8,000 meters lies the infamous death zone, where the human body begins to slowly die. Without supplemental oxygen, your brain starves, your muscles weaken, and your judgment falters. Since the first attempts in the early 20th century, Everest has claimed over 300 lives. Many of those bodies are still there today, frozen where they fell, serving as grim milestones for those who follow. Climbers pass them, sometimes even use them as landmarks. The most infamous of all is Green Boots, a body resting in a small limestone cave along the Northeast Ridge route. For years, every climber passing that way had to step over his legs. Green Boots became a symbol, not of victory but of Everest's merciless reality. In May 2006, David Sharp would join that list, in a way that would make the world stop and ask, how could this happen? The climb begins. The spring of 2006 was one of the busiest seasons Everest had ever seen. Dozens of expeditions, hundreds of climbers, and a circus-like atmosphere at base camp. For some, Everest had become a business. For others, it was still a sacred dream. David was quiet among the chaos. He wasn't there for fame or glory. He was there for himself, for the mountain. And on May 13th, he began his final push toward the summit. He carried little. No Sherpa, no personal support. Only his determination and a few bottles of oxygen. It was a gamble, but David believed he could do it. Climbers later recalled seeing him alone on the Northeast Ridge, moving slowly, methodically, but something was off. His pace slowed. His oxygen supply dwindled. The freezing night wrapped around him like a predator waiting for the final strike. And then, at around 8,500 meters, David made a decision that would seal his fate. He stopped in the limestone cave where Green Boots had lain for years. The cave was barely large enough to crouch in, but to a climber in distress it offered shelter from the wind. For David, exhausted, freezing, and likely disoriented, It must have felt like the only option. He sat down. He did not get up again. A shocking sight. The next day, dozens of climbers made their summit pushes. One by one, they passed the Green Boots cave. Inside, they saw something unexpected. Not just the familiar body of Green Boots, but another man. A man still alive. It was David Sharp. His body was crumpled, his face frostbitten, his voice barely a whisper. Some climbers said he could only mutter a single word. "My name." David, imagine this. You are on the edge of death yourself, climbing the highest mountain on earth. You look down, and there is another human being, dying. Do you stop? Do you try to save him? Or do you climb past because if you linger too long you might not make it back either? That is exactly the question dozens of climbers faced on that day in 2006. And what they did, or did not do, would trigger one of the greatest controversies in the history of mountaineering. As dawn broke on May 14, 2006, the northeast ridge of Everest came alive with movement. Climbers, strangers bound together by the same impossible dream, were pushing for the summit. The line of headlamps stretched up the ridge like a fragile string of stars, each light flickering against the vast darkness of the mountain. But inside the cave of Green Boots, David Sharp sat slumped, his body stiffening, his breath shallow. He was still alive. Barely. The first climbers who passed him stopped. Some tried to speak with him. His lips were blue, his words fragmented. He could barely say his name. His fingers were blackening with frostbite. He was conscious but fading fast. They looked at him. They looked at the summit. They looked back at him. And then, they kept moving. The impossible choice. Here is the brutal truth about Everest. Above 8,000 meters, saving another person can mean losing your own life. Even if you want to help, your body is barely functioning. Carrying another climber is nearly impossible. Oxygen tanks run out. Strength drains away. Every second you stay still, the mountain is killing you too. And yet, the sight of David Sharp, a living man sitting next to the frozen corpse of Green Boots, tore at something deeper. Wasn't there something that could be done? Couldn't someone stay, share oxygen, call for help? Some climbers said they tried. They placed an oxygen mask on David's face, but he could not breathe properly. His body was shutting down. His chance of survival by that point was almost zero. But to the outside world these explanations did not matter, because more than 40 climbers passed David Sharp that day. And almost all of them left him there. The summit fever among those climbing was New Zealander Mark Inglis, a double amputee making headlines as he attempted the summit with prosthetic legs. His team would later confirm they had seen David Sharp in distress. Inglis himself admitted in an interview, "We came across a chap who was in a very poor way. He was under the rock, totally frozen, and we couldn't do anything." But that statement, instead of silencing critics, set off a firestorm. Around the world, people asked, how could dozens of climbers walk past a dying man? Was the summit more important than a life? Mountaineers tried to explain the reality. At that altitude, there is no room for heroics. Even the strongest climber struggles to help himself, let alone someone else. And yet, the image was too powerful to ignore. David Sharp, abandoned, while climbers marched toward glory. It seemed less like mountaineering, and more like a moral collapse on the roof of the world. A mother's pain news of David's death spread quickly back to England. His mother, Linda Sharp, faced the unbearable. Her son's dream had ended in one of the most horrific ways imaginable, and the world was now debating whether others could have saved him. She defended him fiercely, saying David had chosen to climb in his own way, and that he had always known the risks. But grief mixed with questions that had no answers. Had he been abandoned? Had the mountain stolen not just his life, but his dignity? For many, the sight of climbers walking past David was not just shocking, it was unforgivable. The global outrage. The story exploded across newspapers, TV, and the internet. Headlines screamed, "Everest climbers abandon dying man. Summit fever kills compassion. Where is the humanity?" Even Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to stand on the summit of Everest, spoke out in anger. He called it horrifying, saying, "If you have someone in great difficulty, it is your job to save them, not to push for the summit and leave them to die." His words struck like a thunderclap. Suddenly, Everest wasn't just about adventure or glory. It was about ethics, about humanity, about the line between survival and selfishness. The question echoed around the globe: what kind of dream demands that you step over the dying to achieve it? The unseen struggle. But here is where the story becomes even more complicated. Some climbers later revealed that by the time most people saw David, he was already beyond saving. His body temperature had plummeted, his organs were failing, and even with oxygen he could not recover. To stay with him would not have saved him. It would have meant 2 deaths instead of 1. Others admitted that in the chaos of Everest, communication was poor. Few realized who he was, or how desperate his condition truly was. He looked so still, so close to death that some even assumed he was already gone. And yet in the photographs and eyewitness accounts, one fact remained undeniable. David Sharp had been alive. And the world would never forget that so many walked past him. The legend of Green Boots grows after David's death. The Green Boots Cave took on a new meaning. No longer just a landmark, it became a chilling reminder of 2 men whose dreams ended in the same place. Green Boots, unknown but immortalized, and David Sharp, remembered as the climber who died alone, while the world climbed on. His story split the mountaineering community into 2 camps: those who argued he had been abandoned, and those who insisted he was already lost. Between them lay a question that no one could answer completely. Was David Sharp a victim of Everest, or a victim of humanity's choices on Everest? After the storm, the death of David Sharp was not just another statistic on Everest. It became a mirror held up to humanity, showing both our relentless drive to achieve and our capacity to look away. In the weeks that followed, the mountaineering community faced a reckoning. Articles, interviews, and heated debates flooded the media. For some, David's tragedy was proof that Everest had become corrupted by money, ego, and summit fever. For others, it was a painful reminder of the mountain's brutal reality, where even the noblest intentions collapse under the weight of thin air. The harsh reality of Everest's professional climbers spoke out, trying to explain what the world could not understand. At sea level, saving someone feels instinctive, almost automatic. But above 8,000 meters, your body is already dying. Your brain is fogged. Your muscles scream. Even standing upright is a battle. To carry another person, or even to stay still for too long, can mean death. One Sherpa described it simply: in the death zone, you cannot be a rescuer. You can only be a survivor. Still, this explanation did not erase the image of 40 climbers walking past David Sharp. Logic clashed with morality. Reality clashed with human expectation, and David's lonely end remained at the center of it all. Voices of judgment. When Sir Edmund Hillary spoke, the world listened. His condemnation was sharp, unflinching. You don't leave a man to die just because you want to reach the summit. His words ignited a global debate. Was the pursuit of Everest inherently selfish? Had the spirit of mountaineering been lost to commercial expeditions and personal glory? For many, David Sharp was not just a climber. He became a symbol, a warning, proof that in the chase for the highest peak, humanity itself might be left behind. The defense of climbers, but others pushed back against the criticism. Climbers who had been there spoke of the impossible conditions. They insisted that by the time most reached David, he was already too far gone. Helping him would not have saved his life. It would have ended theirs. Mark Inglis, the double amputee climber, faced particularly harsh criticism. Some accused him of chasing headlines while ignoring a dying man. He defended himself, saying, "We did what we could, but he was beyond saving." Even experts agreed that reviving a climber in David's condition would have required a team of strong Sherpas. Immediate medical aid and hours of effort, luxuries that did not exist in the death zone. The mountain, they argued, had already claimed him. A silent witness. The Green Boots Cave, meanwhile. The Green Boots Cave became more infamous than ever. For years, climbers had passed the frozen body of the original Green Boots without much thought. But now, with David's body temporarily lying in the same space, the cave transformed into something darker, a symbol of Everest's indifference. 2 men, 2 dreams, 2 deaths in the same cramped hollow of stone. Climbers reported an eerie silence when passing by. Some avoided looking in, others felt compelled to stop, to whisper a prayer, or simply to stare at the frozen reminder of what Everest demands. The human cost for David's family. The debate was almost unbearable. Strangers around the world argued about his life, his choices, and his death. His mother, Linda, remained dignified. She reminded people that David had been chasing a dream he loved, and he had accepted the risks. But she also carried the pain of knowing her son's final hours were witnessed by many, yet shared by no one. To her, David was not a symbol or a debate. He was her son. A shift in the mountain. Out of the anger and sorrow came change. Expeditions began to rethink their responsibilities. The idea of every man for himself faced new scrutiny. Some organizations started placing greater emphasis on rescue protocols, communication, and accountability. Guides were urged to consider not just the summit, but the lives of those around them. The mountain did not change. Everest remained as deadly as ever. But the way people looked at it, that shifted. David Sharp's death had forced the world to ask questions it could no longer ignore. The price of dreams in the end. David's story is not only about Everest. It is about the human heart. How far will we go to chase our dreams? What sacrifices will we accept along the way? And when faced with the ultimate choice between glory and compassion, what will we choose? For some, David's death was proof that mountaineering had lost its soul. For others, it was a reminder of the mountain's uncompromising law. Survival is personal, and mercy is often impossible at 8,500 meters. But no matter which side you stand on, one truth remains unshakable. David Sharp's name will never be forgotten. His story is written into the ice of Everest itself. Shadows that remain time passed, but the story of David Sharp refused to fade. Instead, it dug its claws into the conscience of the climbing world, refusing to let go. Every article, every documentary, every debate circled back to the same chilling question. Was David abandoned? The divided truth accounts from the mountain were inconsistent. Some climbers swore David was already unconscious, beyond saving when they saw him. Others claimed he was still alive, murmuring faint words, his eyes open, pleading in silence. The truth, like the mountain itself, was clouded. What made the controversy even darker was this. Dozens of climbers had been on Everest that season, but no 2 stories matched. Memory in the death zone is unreliable, bent and twisted by exhaustion, hypoxia, and trauma. Was David Sharp left to die? Or had he slipped too far from the edge of life before anyone could truly help? No one could say with certainty, and so the legend grew. The body that haunted Everest in the months after his death, David's body remained in the Green Boots cave. Climbers reported seeing him curled against the wall, his head slumped, his gear still strapped to his body. It was a grim reminder that Everest does not grant dignity. The mountain preserves you in ice, displaying your failure for every passing stranger. David became not just a story, but a sight, a frozen witness to human ambition. And yet, there was something unbearably cruel about his presence there. Climbers whispered about him, some praying, some taking photographs, others pretending not to notice. But no one could truly ignore him. The decision to move him. Eventually, whispers grew into demands. Leaving David in plain sight felt unbearable to many. His mother, Linda, expressed her wish that his body not be used as a waypoint or a warning sign. So in 2007, a year after his death, a small team of Sherpas carried out a quiet mission. With effort that few outsiders could truly imagine, they moved David's body out of the cave. His remains were placed where passing climbers would no longer stumble upon him in the narrow corridor. It was not a grand ceremony. No flags, no speeches, just silence on the side of the world's tallest mountain. But to those who knew, it mattered. It meant David was no longer a marker on a map. The twist of fate. Ironically, David himself had once argued about the ethics of leaving bodies on Everest. Before his final climb, he had told friends that removing the dead was almost impossible, that climbers should understand and accept the risk of becoming part of the mountain. And yet, when his turn came, his fate became the spark for one of the greatest ethical debates Everest had ever seen. It was as if destiny had written him into this role. A man who believed in the brutal logic of Everest, only to become the very soul around which morality itself was questioned. Legacy in stone and ice. David's death changed Everest in subtle but permanent ways. Expedition leaders began training climbers not just for survival, but for decision-making under impossible pressure. Rescue teams became better equipped, though the mountain's limits never vanished, and yet Everest did not soften. The death toll continued to rise. New tragedies unfolded each season. But David's name lingered, invoked whenever the ethics of climbing resurfaced. For some, he symbolized selfishness. For others, he symbolized the impossible choice no climber should ever face. But for everyone, he symbolized a truth that cut through the thin air. Everest does not just test your body, it tests your soul. The human echo. Linda Sharp carried her grief with quiet strength. She often reminded reporters that her son had died doing what he loved. But she also admitted one wish, that someone had stayed with him if only for a moment so that he had not left the world alone. That single longing struck people harder than any debate. Beyond the politics, beyond the ethics, beyond the science of hypoxia, there was a mother who wished her son had not been left in silence. It made the tragedy human again, not just an Everest story, but a family story. The mountain watches even today. Whispers of David Sharp remain in the wind around Green Boots Cave. Climbers passing by feel the weight of what happened there. Some describe a sensation, as if the cave itself holds the memory of that night. Everest does not forget, and neither does the world. The mountain's verdict, the story of David Sharp, ends not with his last breath, but with the questions he left behind. Everest, in its silence, had forced the world to look at itself, and many didn't like what they saw. Why do they still die? 1. Of the most haunting truths is this. Even after David's death, climbers continue to perish in almost the same way. Alone, abandoned, frozen in the death zone. Why? Because the mountain's cruelty is unchanging. At 8,500 meters, morality collides with survival. You may want to help, but your body refuses. You may wish to carry someone, but the air won't let you. And so each season, new Davids appear. New frozen figures slumped by the path. Each one a reminder, each one a warning ignored. It is not just David's story. It is Everest's endless cycle. The cost of the dream for some. This truth only deepens the allure. Everest remains the ultimate prize, a place where the line between triumph and tragedy is razor thin. They say, if I die there, at least I die chasing my dream. But David's story asks a harder question. What is the dream worth, if it costs not only your life but your humanity? When climbers step past a dying man for glory, the summit is no longer just a mountain. It is a mirror, showing us who we really are. The twist of memory. Here lies the twist most people overlook. David was not the first to be left, and he was not the last. But his story became the loudest because of timing. The world had changed. Cameras were everywhere. Media was instant. The image of 40 climbers walking past a dying man hit at a time when the world was watching. If David had died a decade earlier, he might have been just another silent body on the mountain. Instead, he became the spark for one of the greatest moral reckonings in mountaineering history. In the end, it wasn't the mountain that made him unforgettable. It was us. The echo in every step. Even today, climbers say they feel David's presence, not as a ghost, but as a question. When they push toward the summit and their lungs burn, when they see another climber falter, they hear the whisper, "What will you do if it's your turn to choose?" That is David's true legacy. Not the frozen body in Green Boots Cave, not the debates in newspapers, but the unshakable question he left for every soul who dares to climb. The mountain keeps its secrets. Everest did not change. It never will. The ice will still take lives. The wind will still scream. Dreams will still end in silence. But within that silence, David Sharp's name lingers. Some say Everest is a graveyard. Others say it is a shrine. But maybe it is something worse. A test of what matters most. Glory, survival, compassion. And perhaps that was Everest's verdict all along. So tonight, as you sit safe at sea level, ask yourself, if you were there, in the thin air of the death zone, with a choice between saving someone and saving yourself, what would you do? Because Everest is not just a mountain, it is a mirror. And in that mirror, David Sharp's eyes are still open, still asking, still waiting.